So welcome to the second session, and I have two wonderful speakers to announce in the second special. I start with Marie-Jo Thiel. And Marie-Jo is a professor at the University Strasbourg in France. She is director of the European Center for the Study and Teaching of Ethics of the same university, and she has been trained as a physician, is a member of numerous ethics committees, she's also a member of the Pontifical Academy of Life and has been the president of the European Society of Catholic Theology and member of the European Group on Ethics in Science and New Technologies for the European Commission. She has written many articles and books, and I just named the latest issues, which include, and please apologize my bad French, is Les enjeux éthiques du handicap, and then another book, Ethical Challenges of Aging, Ethical Challenges of Disability, and now it gets very complicated, La vulnérabilité au prisme du monde technologique. I'm very sorry that I'm not much better at my French. But Marie-Jo, I'm happy to have you here as a speaker.
Many thanks, Daniel, and many thanks to the organizers. So I will speak about the question of ethical benchmark, and I will be in continuity with the speakers before me, including Laura, including Monsignor Paglia, and including also Luc. Engineering of molecular and cellular system is based on many types of intervention with diverse ethical implication. It is possible to modify, repair, treat, but not at all costs. Fascination must not blind us to the ethical issues at stake. All these engineering techniques may have clinical applications or can be used for non-therapeutic, meliorative, or even disruptive interventions, or also the industrial control of living organisms. CRISPR-Cas9 opens the way to somatic but also germline genetic modifications. However, it is very difficult to draw a clear line between clinical applications and research, and the regulatory framework are not the same in both cases. Moreover, the ethical issues depend on the target, the context, and the intention behind the intervention. We will not deal here with germline editing for myself, which is normally edited, but I just mentioned the idea that genome editing is a part of a lot of other interventions, even when you create organoids, etc. So, which ethical principles and considerations can guide bioengineering research and clinical applications? A first approach could be the reference to the four principles of the American bioethics that you know: autonomy, beneficence, not maleficence, and justice. But these procedural principles remain very superficial and are not very helpful when it comes to major challenges concerning the very identity of human being, the meaning of existence, and respect for all living beings and the cosmos itself. Ethics is not just the application of principles that give the illusion of controlling the situation and doing the right thing. A global point of view for a community and or a country or the world cannot be a simple deduction from an individual and one-off judgment and vice versa. And the European perspective may be different from the Asian, the African, the American, etc. The contemporary approach is not the same as yesterday and tomorrow, but we can learn from the mistakes and the successes of former times and of different cultures. We might well need to try to modify organisms in order to better understand, to treat and repair them, but not at all costs. In order to assume these challenges, I would like to propose 5 sets of intertwined principles which denote systematic and systemic interactions and levels of reasoning. First, the rights of a free, dignified, autonomous, and vulnerable human being. As pointed out by the Helsinki Declaration, it is the duty of physicians engaged in medical research to protect life, health, dignity, integrity, right to self-determination, privacy, and confidentiality of the person involved in the research. The responsibility to protect research subjects must always rest with a physician or other health professional and never with the research subject themselves, even if they have given their consent. The rights of a free, dignified, autonomous, and vulnerable human being must be at the center of ethical judgment. Vulnerability is not necessarily a negative aspect that should be eliminated, at least if it is not excessive. From an anthropological point of view, vulnerability means an intrinsic human dimension. It is, for me, ontological porosity, which supports relationality and systemic interaction, enabling all persons to perceive the world around them and to co-construct their existence in relation to others through acts and attitudes of respect and responsibility. But vulnerabilities can be worsened, so we must always take care so that they are not. Freedom and autonomy imply consent to the planned engineering, which in turn follows clear, fair, transparent, and as exhaustive information as possible. And because of the complexity of the involved techniques, this represents a huge challenge. How does one explain risks and benefits when they are unclear or so closely intertwined? How do we evaluate a situation where the investigators do not have sufficient ethical expertise and when the consent does not concern a clinically validated therapeutics, but a fundamental and/or a clinical research, which must itself respect all the legal criteria in force? It is even more difficult. In view of the power of technology, the common ethical principles and fundamental rights and freedoms must be questioned. Right to dignity, life, health, bodily and mental integrity, but also the identity of person. When the genome and its representations are touched upon, or the brain and its representation, or even certain uses of stem cells must be carefully thought out. The right to identity is complex. In genome editing, for example, the intervention concerns the genome, that is to say, what defines us as human beings and what distinguishes us from other living beings, which questions both our exceptionalism and genetic determinism. And this goes beyond biological reality, because there is not only the genome, there is also the whole discourse surrounding it, which sees a certain determination between the genome and human behavior, the personality of individuals. And the same can be said about the engineering that creates living entities, embryoid, blastoid, teratoid, gastroloid, etc., or affects the brain and its representations via the metaphors used, perceptions and interpretations. The question of the right to identity is related to the right to fair and appropriate information. But it is also caught between the pincers of the transhumanist movements, aiming at cybernetic and transhuman man. Medicine sails between achievements and promises. Another issue is that of privacy, especially because of the collection and use of data concerning pathology as well as private life. What is the place of confidentiality around this data? These data represent an enormous potential for research. A situation where their confidentiality is not ensured could lead to a loss of confidence, which will block the research. It is therefore a question of finding a balance between data sharing and data security. The security is really important. You have heard about the Corbeil-Essonnes Hospital. Over the last days, they forward the data of people, of the patients of the hospital, because the hospital has not paid the work. Okay. Finally, ethics also raises the issue of equality between individuals, and as the DH Bio points out, the integration of ethical principles in relation to human rights, particularly when physical and mental integrity are at stake, firstly to protect the rights of children and secondly to protect the rights of people with mental health problems. It is true that the therapeutic and the potential preventive objectives generally make investigation more acceptable according to a risk-benefit calculation. Second point, reliability and usefulness, transparency and security. The second set of principles interweaves the usefulness and reliability of engineering techniques. How do users perceive the technology under consideration? The experts' representation of their work is not sufficient to make it acceptable and perceived as safe and useful. Reliability and usefulness remain that without which the technique has no relevance. Many questions may be raised. Is the technology useful, effective? For who? Is it propelled by an overpromising rhetoric? Are there alternative therapies that could have the same effect? What are the risks and uncertainties? How can its reliability be verified? Who verifies it? Is it reproducible? There is no need to hide risks. As the saying goes, a secret is always secreted. But this means that transparency must be accompanied by the clarification of facts and that we must take into consideration the broad meaning of safety, that which includes the concerned human beings, society, context, etc. Any medical treatment involves risks, but are these risks proportional to the expected benefits? To what extent are biases known and prevented? And what about unwanted outcomes? The EGE, in its opinion 32, also stresses the importance of questioning and nuancing the notion of safe enough. That means not limited to providing a last step of ethics clearing of a technology, but including psychological, social, and environmental dimension. Third point, information, training, education, temporality, uncertainties. Another set of intertwined principles points to the role of information and education. Informing patients is not very easy because of the complexity of the techniques involved and the kind of language required to speak about them. The discourse is not neutral, neither unemotional. Such information does not fall on a neutral ground, bereft of any history. Information informs as much as it forms the subject and shapes reality. For genetics, we speak of the genetic code that can be reprogrammed according to popular imagery, or of the book of life, where we can read who we are, and it seems very simple when we just speak so in this way. Information must also assume the temporality and the uncertainties inherent to all human knowledge. A challenge is then the rapid evolution of cellular and molecular engineering techniques. Moreover, because these techniques have repercussions on society as a whole, information must not be reserved to experts. It must be provided progressively to the societal community. It must lead to population education and the collective debate on what kind of society we want and on the acceptability of the ongoing changes. The participatory dimension of this debate is essential. The acceptability of bioengineering in its different modalities and sectors cannot remain limited to a discussion or a battle between experts who themselves are not always very particularly trained in ethics. Ethics therefore also encourages a broad and inclusive debate open to the whole of society. Conflicts and fake news are probably inevitable. I remain the catastrophic aura of GMOs, especially in France, but education should try to prevent and to reduce them. Yet another aspect of information concerns the importance of developing international guidelines. Laura spoke about it, making the publication of negative results mandatory. It was interesting to hear Luke just before about that, the first experiment. Fourth point, social and societal values, cultural and religious perspective. Among the values at stake, special consideration must also be given to social justice, equality and equal access to care, diversity and non-discrimination, the cost of treatment, solidarity, common good, etc. And also cultural and religious imageries and representations, which can sometimes be brakes and sometimes accelerators. The question of the financial cost of cellular and molecular engineering technique is particularly crucial. It is certainly a question of remunerating a laboratory that has developed a technology or a therapy, but some technologies are truly exorbitant and pose ethical dilemmas. We have heard about the amount just before. They are not accessible to ordinary people except for the very rich. Some laboratories still rely on the country's social system, but the same ethical dilemmas arise because if the health budget is controlled and limited, for example, as it is in France, authorizing such a therapy is not always possible, and if the country accepts it, only a very limited number of people will be able to benefit from it. And at the same time, we cannot ignore the fact that the cost of these few people deprives many others of primary health care. The question of cost accumulation accentuates the divide between the so-called developed countries and the others, which will never be able to afford such medical care. But no part of humanity can ignore or even keep another part under tutelage. The issue of vaccines is particularly eloquent in this regard. It demonstrates, if proof were needed, that the world has become global, that no vaccinating in certain countries leads to mutations and revivals of the pandemic. Could religions and Catholic theology have a specific voice? They already have the merit of recalling the values of justice, dignity, etc. for every human being, wherever he or she lives, and whatever his or her situation may be. In particular, if he or she is marked by a handicap or some disability, by poverty or particular fragility. All religions are also concerned in this wise by the anthropological representations they promote, by the conceptions of nature, of the natural, and of the natural law on which the human being is dependent or emancipated, by the possible meaning or not of interventions on the living, the human being, nature, etc. As symbolic systems, they produce narratives and practices that are extremely powerful at the level of imagination and implementation. Fifth and last point, global view. The last ethical consideration concerns the obligation of taking a global view, both on the prospects opened up by technology and on its comprehensive implication at the anthropological, social and societal, political, environmental, economic, cultural and religious levels. The problem is not only what we can do with molecular, cellular tissue systems, engineering techniques, but what they can do to us, to our society, because of their power. If we focus on health, for example, animal testing cannot be ignored for a lot of reasons. We need animal experimentation. There is also the search for alternative methods to animal research. Human cells may be implanted in animals. They are creating chimeras, substantial animal modification, that's de-animalization, etc., etc. Each time various ethical questions arise, the animal welfare and suffering. We have the rule of the 3R, but I will not develop that. Then the link between this medical bioengineering and the most modern techniques of production and industrial control of the living. And finally, there are questions about the specificity and exceptionalism of human beings, about the crossing of the border between humans and animals, or human and living entities. Are embryoid models, or are they embryos? What is a human embryo, and what respect do we owe it? Entities such as embryoids, created from stem cells without fertilization, sometimes with the help of CRISPR-Cas9 or other X technology, could eventually serve as a source of tissue and cells for transplants. Beyond the technical and scientific prowess that arouses many fantasies, particularly in the field of fertility or regenerative medicine, how can we not push it too far and instrumentalize humans? More broadly, bioengineering, even when applied to the medical field, is not without influence on the ecosystem of which all living things are a part. In conclusion, as the EGE points out, quotation, values and ethics are not limit or obstacle to innovation and change. They are the gist of innovation and change. They represent the compass indicating what responsible, inclusive and sustainable ways of future making are. End of the quotation. In the context of ethical pluralism, there is an increasing need for global justice, solidarity, and shared ethical values and principles through balanced critical reflection and dialectic argumentation. Nevertheless, it is not enough to refer to principles and values. They must also be implemented by design in the perspective of a sensible and acceptable world. And for that we need trust. Trust, confidence, as a cum fides, faith with the other, with all others, is the cement for co-constructing the world we desire and put in place the various ethical bricks that are decisive for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marie-Jo, and we have time after the second speaker for questions. I possibly have a question to Marie-Jo, and you said that, you mentioned that information patience is not very easy because of the complexity. The information does not fall on neutral ground. It shapes different reality. And do you think it would be beneficial to introduce a kind of offices for the open public information and discourse in every bigger city, where these offices could disseminate the information to the individuals on new technologies, to the public, and open information to debate to the society? Is this the right way to go?
This is a huge question. I think offices could be a first step, but it is not enough. Especially because very quickly, probably, I would say that people would say this is just fake news, this is an office instrumentalized by the government, and so they will not believe the work of the office. I think it is a very huge, constant problematic for all of us. I mean, what we do now here is a very important activity because we are scientists and ethicists here and also other disciplines. And I think we have to intertwine the information and to give it out and to allow people to discuss with us and to answer and to be very careful. I think that we have not to introduce only one level. An office is a level, but it is not enough. So, but we have also to work on internet, but not the same as you. I mean, the fake news are very often on internet, and this is, I think, a very, very important challenge because of the representation, because of the narration, and that changes a lot of things. So we have to be very careful.
Thank you very much. And other questions? It's Michel Comte, please.
Something that is very concerning for me, having spent a lot of time in countries that are not represented here. And I don't want to go and give the names of the country, but I think this is really a global issue that needs to be addressed. And I think the more people that participate in this, because this question that you're bringing up is really essential for our future. And a very, very big part of this globe, again, I don't want to go in detail, is not complying at all with what you're saying. And I think this is really being in Rome today and not having any of these people in this room and maybe not participating, I think is one of the biggest challenges.
I agree with you. I have no other comment, but it's the same line, yeah. It's very, very important. We see it with the vaccination, for example. But we see also that the rich countries are not so quick to help to give the brevet, how do you say brevet in English? The patent, exactly, thank you. It's not very easy, and yes, we have to go on. We see with the climate change that we cannot just remain in our little place in the world. We have to share knowledge, participation, and also participation, I mean an active participation on the creation of all we do with engineering life. Yeah.
So is the question how to continuously educate the society?
Exactly, and we have to do that since the very beginning of the schools. At the very young age, probably we have not educated the pupils as early as we should, and I think that this has to be introduced in the schools very early.
But what do we do with the population, which is possibly the largest part at the moment, which left school already?
That's a good question.
How can we reach them?
Yeah. I think that probably new technologies are more introduced than we think. I am very often surprised that even if the countries are very poor, they have cell phones. And probably this is an important point when you take YouTube, when you take videos, etc., that you have on internet. It is a way to help people to reflect on. Yeah, but you have also to be sure that these are not fake news.
Thank you very much. I think we are, it's time, we are a little bit, one more question and then we go for coffee.
Not coffee.
No coffee? Sorry, I have to.
Third session.
I thought there's always coffee between.
No.
It was my wish.
I think one coffee is enough. No, I am going to tell about this experience in France. I will talk later about the État général de la bioéthique. I think it's a good procedure to have everybody involved, because the problem is that everybody must be involved in this topic. It's not only a question of the ethical committees or the parliament or even the courts, the judges. And I think this experience of France is amazing to have everybody talking for 2 years about this, because it's the way to learn. When you are involved as a citizen, you will learn. If not, it's very difficult to. So I think it's a good option to look into this experience of France, the État général de l'éthique.
Which experience do you mean in France?
In France, every 7 or 8 years, they need
yes,
to change.
the bioethics law. Yeah.
Yes, they need to change having everybody involved, from the parliament to the citizens. So I think it's an interesting experience. I know that there are some mistakes, problems, but at least it's something.
It's probably nice, but it's probably nicer from the outside than in the inside.
Yes, I know.
Sorry to say this. I think it is important, but we have seen also that, for example, very conservative groups have monopolized the debate, and it's a huge problem. And also, I give you another example. For example, for my students in bioethics, I have a course in bioethics. I ask them after 2 years debate, what is bioethics for you? Have you heard about the bioethics law in our country? One in the group has heard about it. And then I went to another group in Physique Telecom. You see what it means for very young students. Nobody of them have heard about the law. They know bioethics is a concept, it is a modern concept, but they do not know about it, and they didn't know about the law. And the law was discussed for 2 years. So you see, it's a very huge challenge. It is not very easy, because you do not attain the people who need it most, because these young students are really an aim for the law and all what we do, and they do not know about it. So, but you have also very few experts in bioethics. We have also to say that it is very difficult to find people who want to speak to students, and at the same time, the government, for example, and the people in charge of university information and courses are not very aware about ethics. For them, ethics is just what each person knows for him or herself, and that's it. There is no need of training in ethics in France. You see that? It's very, very difficult, and you do not have chairs in ethics, or very few, not a lot, because they consider that ethics is just, as they say, as Monsieur Jourdain qui fait de la prose. That means that everybody, when they speak, do the same. But this is not enough. And this is a huge challenge. I try to be, at this point, present, but since 20 years, I'm not sure that in 20 years, this has changed a lot, very little, okay, but yeah, it's difficult. Really, it's difficult, and I think that France is not alone in this context and in this way of thinking.
Thank you very much, Marie-Jo. I think this is a very important point which we should take up for later for the discussion.
Yeah.
It's not forgotten. I think we are happy that we move on with the next speakers, and I would, before we move on with the next speakers, thank Marie-Jo and Martin for their very wonderful presentations.